What's up, everybody? A little midweek video. It's not about a fight coming up or a fight that just happened. What I'm going to talk about, something I'm going to talk about this week, and it seems like everybody's talking about this week, which is with the retirement of Khabib Nurmagomedov. Assuming it's legit and real, normally I don't believe retirement talk, especially after a fight like that, especially with all he's going through emotionally. Usually you settle down and maybe you come back to the sport. Khabib is one of the few guys who isn't motivated by all the stuff other fighters are motivated by. Money doesn't seem to mean a whole lot to him. I don't think belts are super duper important. Legacy means something, but he believes his legacy is secure. He's at least the greatest lightweight of all time, if not one of the greatest pound for pound of all time. I don't know if anything brings him back other than a showdown with GSP, which kind of would be the ultimate legacy fight. I know he's looked forward to that and wanted it. Maybe that's enough to draw him back. Right now, I would say no. So I'm going to assume that Khabib is finished and never fights again. His legacy is solid. Nothing adds to it. So where does it put him all time? So let me make a Mount Rushmore of MMA, and I'll compare him to the rest of the field and see how it goes. So I would put him on the Mount Rushmore. I would put GSP, Anderson Silva, John Jones. Now, of course, you could put another name up there, but it's a little more debatable, meaning who would number 5 be on that list? You could go with Fedor, you could go with Stipe Miocic, you could go Jose Aldo, Dominic Cruz. So there are a lot of names that could be on there. But the top 3, I think, are pretty solid. GSP, Anderson Silva, John Jones. So how does he compare to each one? So I'm going to start with GSP. The thing about GSP, why is Khabib better than GSP? Khabib is better than GSP because GSP, of the 3 fighters I just named, is the only one who lost during his UFC run in his prime. GSP was knocked out by Matt Serra, biggest upset in my opinion in MMA history, and lost his title. He was not just getting started, he was not past his prime, he got hit and he lost right when he was tearing through everybody, right in his physical prime. He's the only one on this list who had that issue. Why is he better than Khabib? He's better than Khabib because he had a title run that was so much longer than Khabib. He fought every name out there. So his run was longer and he fought every name. The one thing about Khabib's legacy that is difficult is there are still a lot of names at 155 he didn't beat. He's the one guy on this list who didn't clear out a division. Guys on this list cleared out, in some cases, multiple generations of fighters. There wasn't anybody at the end where you went, God, he never fought so-and-so. John Jones wiped out everybody. Anderson Silva wiped out everybody at middleweight. GSP wiped out everybody at 170. There wasn't anybody we went, oh, why didn't he ever fight this guy? He beat them all. Khabib left a lot of names on the table. There's still a lot of great 155 fighters he didn't fight. You could argue he beat the best of them, but he didn't beat everybody like all these guys did. So why is that? Part of the reason is, back in my day, 20 years ago, GSP, Anderson Silva, John Jones a little bit, fighters got title shots much, much quicker. You didn't win, whatever it was, 7 or 8 in the UFC before you got a title shot. Anderson Silva's second fight in the UFC was for the title against Rich Franklin. GSP, his third fight in the UFC was his first title shot against Matt Hughes, where he came up short. Third fight in the UFC. So the title runs of this era are a lot longer because they start much faster. So Khabib didn't win the title until late in his career, and so he doesn't have the run of a GSP. So those are the two differences. GSP was champ longer and fought better names, but he did lose in his prime when he should not have. Khabib never had that step-down performance. Also, they have the same wow factor. And what I mean by that is they both took guys down, great ground and pound, often played it safe. The one criticism of GSP's career is guys like Dan Hardy, love Dan Hardy, he's my boy, but GSP was a level better than Dan Hardy, and he couldn't finish Dan Hardy, played it safe the whole time, won a comfortable decision. Against Jake Shields, for example, got hit in the eye, and then kind of took the last 2 rounds off. Already had 3 in the bag. He tended to do stuff like that. Rarely did you have like a water cooler moment after a GSP fight. Like, wow, I don't believe what I just saw. GSP really didn't do that. He was just solid, incredible MMA wrestler, and, great top pressure, much like Khabib. Another thing in GSP's favor is GSP won at multiple weight classes. Sure, it was a one-shot deal. Michael Bisping, who was champion, but I don't think an all-time great middleweight. But he did come back and win a title at 185. All said and done, I know this is a little controversial, I put Khabib ahead of GSP all time just because his run, he never had one performance where he, like in the first fight against Matt Hughes, where GSP just looked like kind of a deer in headlights. First fight with Matt Serra, where he kind of looked like a deer in the headlights. First fight with BJ Penn, got beat up in that first round. So by 55er. So there were little times where GSP looked less than perfect in the UFC. Other than Gleison Tibau, Khabib never did. So I'll go with Khabib over GSP. Next one on the list, this is a tough one, Anderson Silva. Now, the pros for Anderson Silva. He, once again, had a much longer title run. He won 16 in a row in the UFC, wiped out every middleweight you could think of. Did have moments of vulnerability even at 185. Chael Sonnen, most notably, was half a round away from being champion and bungled it away and ended up in a submission. Had a bad first round in the rematch, but came back and won the fight. Do those moments of humanity count against him? A little bit, but he won those fights. So that doesn't bug me that much. Once again, started his title run much earlier than Khabib. So his second fight in the UFC was a champion. So he's had a really long run. And his wow factor is off the chart. I mean, of my top 5 knockouts of all time, 3 of them are Anderson Silva. You know, that front kick gorgeousness against Vitor Belfort, right to the chin, knocked him out. Did I just see that kind of stuff? He has a knockout of a guy named Tony Freakland in, I think it was Cage Rage in the UK, where he throws a hook and then a back elbow and just levels him. And then Forrest Griffin, walk-away jab while moving backward, knocks out a former champ at 205. So he has much more wow factor than Khabib. Also, most people, I guess, don't know this because I haven't been in the sport that long. He was also number 1 at 170. When he beat Hayato Sakurai in Shuto, he became the number 1 welterweight in the world. Now, it didn't last that long because Carlos Newton beat Pat Miletich and Carlos Newton became number 1. But for a few weeks, I think it was 2 or 3 weeks, Anderson Silva was the number 1 welterweight in the world. And regardless of how long he was number 1, he was a great welterweight, a great middleweight, and had success at 205. He had success at 3 weight classes, right? Became number 1 at 170, number 1 at 185, greatest of all time at 185, and then knocked out a former champ at 205. Never got a shot at a belt, but James Irvin and Forrest Griffin, those are huge wins above his weight class. None of these fighters were successful in 3 weight classes. None of them. He's the only one. So that's huge. But what counts against him? He lost to Ryo Chonin and Daiju Takase. These are 2 guys who do not have their own chapter in MMA history. Daiju Takase, better than his record indicates, but he's got a crap record. Great submission guy, got caught in an inverted triangle. And then Ryo Chonin, with a flying heel hook, finished Anderson Silva in Pride. So the thing is, do you count his prime really in the UFC, or do those fights in Pride count against his legacy a bit more? That's a tough one. The tiebreaker here for me is if Anderson Silva retires right after he beat Stephan Bonner, he's number 1. He just didn't. He just hung on too long and kept, obviously he's in the middle of a very tough stretch of his career where he keeps losing fights. They're all good names, right? It's not like he's losing to bums, right? Twice to Chris Weidman, and then you got DC on that list. So Israel Adesanya. It's not like he's losing to scrubs, Jared Cannonier, but he is losing. Had he retired right at the end of his prime, he's number 1 with a bullet. Hung on a little too long. It's still hanging on. So that really counts against him. But also the losses to Ryo Chonin and Daiju Takase, who are 2 guys I think Khabib just smashes, right? And yet they beat the number 1 middleweight in the world. The guy ended up being the number 1 middleweight in the world. That's a really tough one. I think, God, they're just about tied in my mind. I'll give the slight edge to Anderson Silva because of that wow factor. He did stuff you couldn't believe you were seeing in real life. A prime Anderson Silva was just a thing of beauty to watch. Unbelievable. I'll give him the slight edge over Khabib. But once again, a virtual tie to me. So number 1, Jon Jones. I really believe Jon Jones just has better credentials. He wiped out 3 generations of top fighters. 3 generations. Of course, Shogun Rua, Rampage Jackson, he beats Lyoto Machida, Rashad Evans, all that generation of champions before him, he just destroyed. Then that next generation, Glover Teixeira, Alexander Gustafsson, those next generation guys, he beats all of them too. All those guys are on the back 9 of their careers. Now he's taking on this new generation. He hasn't looked as sharp against those, but time catches up with everybody. And he still, on paper, beat them. Yes, I believe he lost to Dominic Reyes. I think Dominic Reyes took the first rounds, but God, everybody's prime has an end, right? He's just starting to slow down. But when you look at the wow factor, the way he beat guys, he's incredible. Number 2, the generations he beat so many big names. And, Jon Jones is kind of an asshole about it, but he's right when he says, look, 15 times I had gold wrapped around my waist. This guy did 4 times, and He's considered better than me. That doesn't make a lot of sense. It's true. He didn't leave any names on the table. He beat everybody you can think of in the division, usually in spectacular fashion. People are kind of saying that his last few performances negate that. Sure, they're close decisions the last few, but before that, it was wipeout, wipeout, wipeout. I mean, he was great at that. And when he did win a decision, it wasn't close, right? So I don't think that should be held against him. What should be held against him, and the one thing that makes me think maybe you should give Khabib the nod, is the number of times this guy has been popped. When I think of the greatest hitters in baseball history, every time I think Mark McGwire and Barry Bonds, like ding, I think of a little asterisk right over all their stats because we know they were doping. And these guys never even pissed hot. I know MLB really didn't do best testing in the world. But my point is, Jon Jones pissed hot several times. You have to have that question mark over all of his wins. Even in his prime, how many of those were by a clean fighter? That hurts him. It really does. Does it hurt him enough for me to not call him number one? No. I still think Jon Jones is number one. I put Khabib, Anderson Silva neck and neck at number two, GSP number three. That's really how I see it right now. Of course, my mind might change. And of course, Jon Jones, if he wins a title at heavyweight, he's number one with a bullet, really. So that's another thing. He's complaining a lot about where Khabib is. Khabib's legacy, should he never come back, is frozen in time. It'll never get any bigger, any greater, any better. Jon Jones can. He can do better and add to his legacy and overcome Khabib, which he just might do. Anyway, those are my thoughts. Please let me know what you think. It's always about ticky-tack little things, talking about the greatest of all time. It's always a little tiny splitting hairs, but that's what the debate's all about. All right, later.